One of the most compelling spiritual teachings I confronted in my youth that sticks with me forever, right? Since then, about the work we do as human beings. And I encountered it when I was studying Freemasonry and looking at the influence of Christian Hebraism, which is sort of Christians studying Jewish traditions and incorporating them into their own
Phails at philosophy.
Usually Christian understanding of the world, right? This starts in the Renaissance. And it's a lot of like the influence of Jewish Kabbalah on Freemasonry and occultism and stuff like that comes from this early Christian Hebraism was part of what I was interested in. And a concept that is still important in a lot of Jewish thought, especially social justice thought, but is important in that late medieval Renaissance Kabbalah is the notion of Tikkun, of repair, right? And it's this notion that the world is broken, right? Now, in this case, the world is broken because when God created the world, his light was so radiant and so beautiful that it shattered the vessels of the world and created all these problems in the world, right? But that our work, again, in the context of here, our work as children of God, right? But our work as spiritual beings, our work as human beings, is to participate in the repair of that damage, right? And what's powerful about this is you're part of a larger project and you have something to do.
Yeah.
You're not in control, right? Now, I don't know how useful it is to shift that control to a cosmic entity, right?
Sky Daddy.
Yeah, in that sort of monotheistic framework. It's not a way I can make sense of the world.
Yeah.
I was talking to a neighbor recently, last night, about it, and it's just sort of like, he was very advocating monotheism as this sort of natural thing we would arrive at if we're just smart enough. And I'm just like, it doesn't make sense to me. But the notion that there's a work to do, but that work is what you can contribute instead of taking control of the whole. And I think that what he offers here is a different kind of vision of that, where the work is the work of a kind of basic human ability to recognize suffering.
Yeah.
To recognize
that's what he said
unhappiness.
compassion was. Compassion is to see suffering and be moved by it.
Yeah. And be moved up by it to try to end it.
To end it.
Yeah. Which is the initial move of the Buddha, right? Now, he's got a whole program then that comes from that says, well, when I think about it, that suffering is anchored in our grasping, and you need to get rid of the grasping, and we can examine that or not, or whether that does that, but I don't think compassion relies on that to be a potent tool.
When I read this last night, I thought about it within the context of a grocery trip with my daughter. My daughter and I went to the grocery store, and I'd been reading this chapter, and I was laid off, I guess, last July, and austerity measures have taken hold.
Yeah.
You got
to tighten your belt.
I've been tightening the belt in every way, right? I used to drink kombucha. I don't drink kombucha anymore. I used to, not really worry when I went to the grocery store. I just buy whatever I wanted. And now I don't do that.
Yeah.
I only buy things that I think we really need.
Circumstances that force a level of mindfulness on you.
Yeah. And, that's, I think, difficult for my daughter to understand. Because she wants things.
Yeah, because especially at an adolescent age, the engine is turned on want.
Want.
Yeah.
And, there's a lot of saying no.
Yep.
And then there's a lot of the same kind of way I felt reading this was inadequacy.
Right.
Guilt.
Yeah.
Shame. Because she'll say stuff like, you should just get that job. You should get another one of those jobs so that I can have all these things I want.
Right.
And then, she wanted something kind of simple. It was like these fancy markers or fancy pens that were different colors. And there was the expensive ones, the brand that were $12, and then there was the the grocery store brand that was like $4. And I was like, I'll buy them. I'll buy these ones. And it seemed like she suffered as a result of having to buy the $4 ones.
Right.
And I thought, well, I could alleviate her suffering. If I followed this, if I felt her suffering and wanted to alleviate her suffering, and that was the goal. My goal is just to alleviate my child's suffering in that moment and buy the $12 pins. I could do that. Is that what I do over and over? Is prioritize ending suffering? Because when you look at this, they talk about Dāna is to give.
Yeah.
And it's like,
yeah,
how much do I not consider my own place and my own scarcity and my own concerns and give? And that's the question I have.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's part of, and this may be the argument for a system like Buddhism, right? That just the desire to relieve suffering may not be enough if you also don't have a sufficient system for diagnosing what's causing that suffering.
Yeah,
because from a classic Buddhist perspective, buying the $12 markers is not relieving suffering, because the problem, she's not suffering because she got the markers that were less expensive. She's suffering because she craves the markers that are more expensive. And getting the markers that are more expensive is just a very temporary palliative that doesn't address the craving. And the craving is the root of the suffering.
I should have just explained that to her.
Right. I'm sure she would have been totally like, oh, I totally understand
totally
that.
understand
it's
that,
just
Dad.
the craving.
Just buy me those cheap markers now, Dad.
Right. No, and I think that's an interesting thing to think about, because then you can't solve anyone else's addiction to craving.
Well, then can't everything be put down to craving?
I think to a certain extent.
And compassion? I mean, where
you
does
can only
compassion
solve it.
start and where
You can only
does it end
solve
in
the
world?
craving in yourself. I mean, let's look at that example, like in a kind of classic Theravada, like ancient school form of Buddhism. The work, if you're a monk, of giving.
Dāna.
Right? What is your work in that? The most fundamental work you engage in giving, because you've gone through so many other things that you've given up already.
Yeah.
Right?
You got the robe. You've even given up your hair.
You've given up your hair. And your job is actually to be a receptacle of giving. Your main role within the kind of social system of Buddhism
is to receive.
Is to go beg for food and give lay people the opportunity to gain merit,
giving.
To experience that by feeding you. Now, that's also rooted in a vow where you have said, I'm not going to generate my... So if I go out and beg and you don't give me food, I don't get food, right? Like, I'm not allowed to prepare my own food. That's part of the... so there's a whole set of things that are in there, but it does create this social system that ultimately sees kind of, if you think of a higher order of operating within that system, is to do a work that is more about creating the opportunities for other people to enter that stream.
Yeah.
Than to try to participate in that stream. Not because you're not participating in that stream, but you're just participating in it on a level that is far deeper than you're even going to expect them to do in their lifetime.
Yeah, because you've given everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
You've
given yourself to the work.
Yeah. Your Dāna is your life.
Yes. Yeah. I think that is, yeah. And you are, like, if you're, in a classic monastic, you're practicing that offering, that giving through making offerings in the morning of mantra. You're making, you're making offerings of words, you're making offerings of fire, you're making all those kind of liturgical offerings, which are the way you have trained yourself to practice. But for the lay person, you're giving them the opportunity to practice that by feeding you. And I just find that interesting, because that's sort of like...
Yeah, that is interesting.
It's a different way to think about even hierarchy and what the role of hierarchy is. You're not moving to the top of the system. In many ways, you're moving to the bottom and trying to rule from the bottom.
Yeah, the best of us aren't doing that.
Yeah.
At least the most successful of us aren't doing that.